So glad that we have this first reading from the book of Genesis, because it gives me the opportunity to talk about underwear as opposed to outerwear. Adam and Eve had no underwear. Did you notice that? Now, since you are far younger than I am, there is a word that we use to talk about wearing your pants way down around your hips so that your underwear shows. What is that called? Sagging? See, I thought it was actually called slouching, but this is slouching. Sagging is being so proud of your underwear that you don't wear your pants so everybody can see your underwear, right? And God forbid if they're dirty. But the reality of this reading is that it's not about underwear or outerwear. The reality of this reading from the book of Genesis is to illustrate that Adam and Eve were tempted. They were tempted to believe and to think and to act as though they knew and understood more than God Himself. And they give in to the temptation. And so, like the rest of us, when we give in to temptation and we sin, they had to live out the consequences of their actions. They had to be responsible for what they had done. And since then, we've all had to wear clothes, at least most of the time. But Adam and Eve began to think and to believe that they were far smarter and understood far better than God did. That's why in the second reading, Paul's letter to the Romans, Paul could write to the Roman community that sin and death entered the world through one man, Adam and Eve. And because of the actions of Adam and Eve, sin and death are a reality in our lives. Now, when we get to the gospel passage from St. Matthew, Jesus is tempted in the desert for 40 days, 40 nights. Jesus is tempted. Now, the difference is that Jesus doesn't give in to the temptation. Jesus remains focused on who He is, on who God the Father is. Jesus remains focused on what He has come to do. The Son of God, the one who would bring to us truth and light and the glory of heaven. What were the temptations of Jesus? Matthew gives us 3. There's the temptation to think and to believe that Jesus knows far better than God the Father. There's the temptation to think and to believe that Jesus is far more powerful than God the Father. There's the temptation to think and to believe that Jesus is entitled, that He deserves far more than God has given Him, that He deserves far more than any other human being. And remember, because Jesus refuses to fall with these temptations. Jesus, Paul writes, is the one who gives life and glory. There's not one of us here who is exempt from sin. Each and every one of us is tempted constantly, repeatedly, on a daily basis. We are tempted. And none of us is exempt from sin. Of course, except me. You know, I used to be conceited, but now I'm perfect. I'm that blessed individual who gets to get up in the morning and look into the mirror and see the face of God. And we all know people like that. And I'd be willing to bet that I'm not the only one who could say that here tonight. We are tempted. Some of us are strong enough to resist temptation for a while. And then in a moment of weakness, we give in and we sin. Some of us are not quite as strong and we give in immediately and we're constantly going to confession. We are all tempted. And we are all sinners. And as I read these readings and studied them this weekend, as I listened to the news all week long, read the newspapers, listened to people in my office, I really began to wonder, what is our greatest temptation? And of course, that temptation, whatever it is, our greatest temptation, will also reveal our greatest sin. And all we have to do is go back to the book of Genesis, to the gospel passage from Matthew, and our greatest temptation is to believe and to think that we know better than God. That we are more powerful than God. We can do anything and everything. That we are entitled. God owes us because we're better than anybody else on the face of the earth. And right now, in our society and in our culture, that temptation gives fruit to this entire discussion of immigration and refugees and deportation. Think about that. We know better than God. We are more powerful than God. We are entitled. And no one else can have not even a little piece of what we have. Just this week, it was reported to me that a teacher in one of our public schools spoke to one of her young students and wanted to know, what are you going to do when your parents are deported? An adult, a thinking adult, said that to an innocent child. And what happens? Fear enters the picture. And fear is contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Indignities and disrespects enter the picture because human beings are no longer seen as human beings. They are now instruments of toil. We've worked the hell out of them. Now they have to go home. And that is contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And families get split up and broken apart and divided. And that is contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ. You see, it's perfectly okay because we are wiser and smarter than God, because we are more powerful than God, because we are entitled to enjoy all these gifts that God has given us, and we don't have to share them. We can hoard them. Is that really who we are? Are we really so aligned with Adam that we don't mind wallowing in our sin and death? Have we truly accepted the gospel of Jesus Christ so that we can glory in all that Jesus has won for us through his death and resurrection? Friday morning, Cardinal DiNardo and several other major religious superiors of major churches within the city called a press conference at the Chancery Building for the Archdiocese. It's not the first time they've done this. And they have called upon the federal government, and all with legislative power, to enter into honest, sincere discussion and to develop an immigration policy that is just and fair, that protects the rights of human beings and protects the rights of families, that will also protect the borders of all countries. These readings are far more than a discussion of underwear become outerwear. These readings are about who we are as the body of Christ, as the people of God who live in the United States of America and who can see in the faces of each and every person in the universe the image of Jesus, who is a child of God. We are all children of the same God, the same Father. And how we live out our faith is testimony to our gratitude for this faith.